Welcome to Margin for Mission, the CRI Cape and Cross podcast, where two friends, Ken and Chris, bring you real talk about creating space for what matters most. Because when your organization has financial and operational margin, you can focus on your mission with confidence.
We're professionals who've spent years helping churches, higher education institutions, and other mission-focused nonprofit organizations manage their accounting, tax, compliance, and other challenges. We understand the complexities you face, and we're here to make it simpler.
In each episode, we'll dive into practical insights on leadership, operations, and the everyday challenges of running a nonprofit without the jargon.
And we'll talk about life, too. Family, faith, quite a bit of football, and finding balance in a world that rarely slows down.
So whether you're managing budgets, leading teams, or just trying to keep your mission moving forward, you're in the right place.
This is Margin for Mission. Let's get started.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Margin for Mission. It is one of those things where we always get to enjoy this time. It's one of the more favorite things of my job. Don't quote me on that piece, but at the same time, it is something I truly do enjoy as well. And this week, I'm glad to welcome back Chris Purnell. Chris, where have you been this past week?
Ken, it's good to see you, man. It's good to be with our guest, Glenn, who I'm sure you'll introduce here in a second. But I was in the great country of Peru in South America, looking around for a cute little marmalade sandwich eating bear. If you know, you know. But yeah, it was a great time. It's a beautiful country down there. Wonderful food. We spent a little time in Lima. We spent some time at Machu Picchu, which, by the way, trying to figure out how they got 7-ton stones. Moving those things around in the Andes it's a mystery, right? Like, how does that happen in the 15th century? And then went to the Amazon rainforest for a few days with some family, and just sweat buckets. Left 15 pounds of sweat down there in the Amazon. So
It's not from drinking the water, right, Chris? It's just you sweating.
Just from sweating. That's right, just from sweating. So great time with family, great time with grandparents, nieces. So it was just a really blessed time to be in God's good creation. 10% of the world's biodiversity, I don't know if you knew this, is in the Amazon rainforest. So
Oh, wow.
I'm certain that I saw at least 8% of that, and 2% of that was, mosquitoes of various kinds. So it was a good time. It was a good
Did
time.
you have to acclimate to the elevation when you went to Machu Picchu? I know, like, that's one of the things I always think about is just how different elevation is, and how, even for me, when we used to go to certain parts of Colorado, how easily just tying your shoelaces, you'd be out of breath so quickly. And it's because of the oxygen is a little bit less. Was that something you experienced too in Machu Picchu?
Oh gosh, so Machu Picchu was okay.
Okay.
But usually what you do is you fly into Lima, right? And then you take another short little flight to Cusco. And in Cusco, it's about 12,000 feet of elevation. That's where I probably had one of the longest nights of my life, because I was battling with what ChatGPT told me was ultimately a moderate case of altitude sickness.
Oh, yeah.
So in the middle of the night, I'm putting in, hey, got a little bit of a headache. And Chat was like, oh, you're fine. You're fine. And then I
Drink full of water.
Just drink water. Go with the tap. Just get a cup of water. And then my heart started racing, and then I started feeling nauseous. And if you could have seen this chat stream, it would have been eerie in retrospect. So had a little bit of altitude sickness, made it through, and then eventually came back to Cusco, and I was fine. But yes, thanks for asking. Great time. Highly, highly, highly recommend.
Well, good. And we're glad you're back in one piece. Also, you look great in general, Chris. So I'm glad that you enjoyed your time
too,
at
Tom.
Amazon. Well, I know we're also excited to have someone here on this episode with us too. This has become a long-standing friend of ours at the firm as well. And we've been so excited just to be able to collaborate with him. We're so excited to have you on here, Glenn. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and always great to connect with you guys. Known you guys for a long time, and appreciate all you do for the church, the big church, and for all the local churches that you interact with, keeping us legal, keeping us informed, keeping us headed in the right direction. So it's always good.
I'm always happy whenever we get to do something like that too as well, Glenn, as long as none of us go into jail. That's one of the biggest things that I'm always like, hey, you're here another day. Yep. But again, this is where part of what we do in this episode, especially when it comes to margin for mission, we do love just the fact that we get to bring in some wonderful speakers such as you, Glenn, because you get to see what happens in the trenches. Because I know for us, especially when we get to interact with pastors, we get to interact with church leaders, it is fun that we get to see what's going on in their lives. But I think it even adds even more credibility when they get to hear it directly from someone like you. And so I know this is where part of it is. I'm just going to say really high level that Glenn has had such a storied past in terms of the experience he's had uh, and
So,
all the experiences he's willing to share with us too. Currently, he leads the administration at Seacoast Church as well, and it's one of those things where that church has been a fast growing church, and with it comes a lot of the experiences that Glenn has seen. But I'm not going to steal that thunder from him. I would love for you, Glenn, if you don't mind, share a little bit about your story as well and what takes up your time at Seacoast.
wow. So, thank you. I've actually only had one job at Seacoast. I've had the same job since 1995. So when our founding pastor, Greg Surratt, hired me, he said, it's like, hey, I just need you to help me run the church. I'm like, okay, so what does that mean? He said, well, you basically have two jobs. You have to keep us off the front page for all the wrong reasons, and you have to put me out of jail. And as long as you do those two things, you're good. I said, well, great. I'm going to add one more thing. I don't want your job. And he said, great, because he doesn't want mine. And so for 35 years, we've gotten along incredibly well because, we've been on the front page of the paper for the right reasons, not the wrong ones. He's never had to go to jail. And, I don't seek to want his job and he doesn't want mine. And so, it's been good. So people ask me, like, what do you do? Like, what's your job entail? And the easiest way I try to describe it is my job is everything that nobody else wants to do. So just think of a job that, that's kind of what I do. So it's kind of a soup to nuts. I get all the fun jobs. Like I get to read all the contracts. I get to do lease renewals. I interact with landlords. I have to do construction. I have to interact with town to get permits. I'm the guy that the town calls when they want to fuss about something that we've done. Like I get to field those kind of phone calls. Involved in designing campuses and a lot of the just logistics of getting them open, managing it, making it happen on a day to day. I tend to say if the services go off well, then I and the people that I work with and have done a great job. So as long as nothing blows up and it all works, then we've done a good job. So my job is kind of all the stuff that nobody else wants to do.
And it sounds like, of course, it seems sometimes like a thankless job, Glenn, where I'm sure whenever someone reaches out to you, it's not because they're singing the praises, but because something's going on. And it's one of those things that we all play a specific role at the church. And that's where part of it is you played such a crucial role at Seacoast. And I think, I know you're kind of minimizing overall what the impact is, but Seacoast has made such an impact in everywhere it has been with the communities as well. And that's where I was just even curious, Glenn, because I know you mentioned you've been with Seacoast for so long. Can you take us back to the early part of your careers, like before you even stepped to Seacoast? What were you doing before you stepped into leadership at Seacoast?
Yeah, and it's interesting. So immediately before I worked went to work for the church, I worked for an office supply wholesaler. The big, thick, inch long catalog where you can order anything office related.
Oh
I
yeah.
worked for the company that sold all that, and basically what that meant was I drove a lot. I covered basically the eastern two-thirds of the state of South Carolina. I knew back then I knew where all the payphones were, the clean bathrooms were, like just because you end up driving all those, and so I
Oh
spent
yeah.
a lot of time, and you know uh, I remember early on when Greg hired me, he said, like, I need somebody to come in and take this over and just help me run the church. And back then we were a church. When my wife and I first started attending a church, we were a church of 250. When I came on staff, we were about 600. And, we could sit around, the entire staff could sit around a small table and probably still have some room left over. And so, my job was going to just come in and take all the administration off of it. And so one of the first things I did was that I was able to fire Greg from signing all the checks and handling any of that. I let his wife, who was handling all the finances, I let her move on to some other stuff. So I can tell people that I am probably one of the few people that have ever fired their senior pastor and his wife, and I'm still employed 35 years later. So, uh, it's been a lot of fun. But a lot of my background was in retail. I actually grew up in the Midwest, running retail stores, especially sporting goods stores, and that's really where I got into a lot of the stuff that I do today. I learned about sales. I learned about people. I learned about management and finances and accounting and just how to manage how to manage inventory and logistic stuff. And I'll never forget, I was probably in my late teens, early 20s, and my boss at the time came to me, handed me a set of blueprints, and said, "I need you to go build this store, just do a retail outfit." And it's one of the few times in my life that I remember everything about it. I remember where I was. I remember what we were doing. He hands this to me, and I remember thinking, why do I need to go do this? I don't even know how to read a set of blueprints. I don't, and like, this is not going to be what I do for a living. And now 35, 40 years later, I kind of look at it now and say, God just chuckled and said, like, watch this. And so now construction is a large part of what I do. And so again, a lot of the stuff that I learned early on, even way before I was a believer, it helped form me and give me the background into what I do today. Like back then I was reading retail leases. Well, now I'm learning, I'm reading, church leases and writing leases and subleases and contracts. Like a lot of the stuff that I did back then before I ever was a believer, God kind of helped form and shape me into what I am today. And so it's interesting to look back on what I did and go, wow, there really was a plan even before I even had a clue what that plan was or what it was going to look like. He orchestrated my steps, even though I wasn't even a believer. And honestly, back then, I probably didn't even know much about who he was.
Mm, mm. Yeah, there's a lot of good leadership lessons there, right? That the Lord never wastes any moments of our lives, right? Even before we knew him, he knew us. He was orchestrating the events of our lives, our experiences, the mentors that would kind of watch over us along the way and give us pointers and all that good stuff. And one of the things I was kind of reflecting on as you were talking, Glenn, was the idea of being an administrative pastor, or the way you describe it, the phrase that comes to mind is like the junk drawer pastor, the things that no one else really needs to do. No one else really wants
Chris's
to
words,
do.
not mine, Glenn. Please do my friend.
Got it.
All in love, all in love. But just the idea that you're picking up the stuff that other folks don't really want to do, or maybe they're not especially skilled at. You're freeing people up to do the out front ministry, that sort of thing. And so I've heard of people who come out, they're really young, and they realize, man, I've wanted to be a preacher since as far back as I can remember. That's my pastor story. He was like second, third, fourth grade, somewhere around there. He discerned an itching, a call to become a pastor. Back when I was that age, I wanted to be a trash man. We all take different paths, right? The garbage man looked awesome. And so for you, it does not sound like you came out of the womb and decided, you know what? I want to be an executive pastor. I want to be an administrative pastor. So if you could tell us a little bit more about the twists and the turns, and then that moment where you discerned that calling to become the staff member at the church, and how did you process that? How did you think about that, and what sort of came into that decision making?
Well, it was interesting. Back then I was in sales. I was making really good money, and Greg came to me and said, like, I need somebody to do this, and by the way, I will pay you $35,000 a year. Like, okay, so hold on a minute.
King's ransom.
So let me get the price. You want me to take a 70% cut in pay to work more hours to help the church? It's like, I got to think about that. I got to pray about this. And honestly, my wife and I prayed about it, and it was a very kind of short process to say, yes, this really is what God wants me to do. And I back up to when I went to work for the office supply wholesaler. Another one of the times where I remember it, my wife says, like, well, how long do you think you're going to work for them? And I clearly remember I said, I will work for them until I find the job that I will do for the rest of my life. And I remember thinking at the time, Glenn, that is a really harebrained statement. Like, how can you even make that kind of a statement? Like, there's no basis for that. And yet now, 40 years later, 45 years later, I'll look at it and go, it truly was, it was a correct statement. To me, it was a God-given statement that he gave me back then in my early days of being a Christian, that's what I'm going to do. And so he helped
Mm.
again guide and orchestrated. And you know, we have twin boys that are now 32 and gainfully employed and out of the house. But I remember those early days. God has provided for us in every way. We never lacked for anything when we went and and took that kind of a pay cut to go to work for the church. We still went on vacations. We still had a lot of fun. We still did great things. And our kids look back and have fond memories of their childhood. But God truly did provide for us. And I think part of that was our obedience of saying, yes, this is what I think that they're telling me to do and that I need to do. And my wife fully supporting that whole process to say, yes, we're going to make it work. We'll figure out how to make it work. God will provide the finances, and really has kind of helped orchestrate through this whole process to get us to where we are today. And along the line, I met some great people, have some lifelong friends that, that have been in churches across America. And honestly, it's part of, I think, some of the reason that I've been heavily connected with the church network, and specifically the
Mm.
Metro network, which is kind of a subset of that,
Yeah.
of working with me, administrators in medium and large churches, just to try and help us, do life. And I again, another one of those times. This was 2001. I was Seacoast was starting to grow very quickly, and I truly was lost on how do you do this. And so I remember going to a church network conference and connecting with a couple of their leadership and go, are there 3 or 4 people that I can, maybe sit around a table, buy a cup of coffee to, and just learn from? And so, I got connected with 3 or 4 of us, and then hey, the next year at the conference, 7 or 8 of us sat around a table, and then it was 15, and then it was 20, and now we do a session at their conference, and we'll have 75 people in the room just to talk shop. And one of the things that
Wow.
God kind of laid on my heart back then was I needed to try and do a job to connect with all these people that do what I do, because in accounting, it's a debit or a credit. Like, there are no other options. It goes on one side of the ledger or the other. And yet the ministries that we serve and the pastors that we serve are 5,000 shades of gray. And I
Yeah.
remember early on me thinking, like, how am I going to balance these two? Like, I love
Yeah.
I love our senior pastor, but he comes up with an idea and then he expects it to be carried out, and he has no clue how to connect the 49 steps in between them.
Completely unheard of anywhere, Glenn.
Yeah,
I've
I'm
never
sure
heard of a
we're
senior
the
pastor
only
without
church that has
studying.
that. Yeah. And so, really, I felt like God kind of laid on my heart that this is one of the things I needed to do, was to try and connect with us to help us do life together. And if nothing else, to act as a sounding board for all of us. Because again, one of the things I learned over the years is that, you know, that no matter what church you're in or organization, for profit, not for profit, doesn't matter. There are going to be decisions that are made at our companies that we think are probably some of the dumbest ideas that have ever come out, or just like, why are they doing this? And I can't go to my boss and say, hey, that's really a stupid idea. Like, you just can't have those kind of conversations within your church. And so for me, having a network of people that I could pick up the phone and call and just go, I just need to vet. I need to tell you
Mm.
the what and the why, and realize that, number one, they understand what I'm going through because they've done, they've had the same kind of experiences,
Sure.
and realize that they'll also be there to help me. They'll guide me.
Absolutely.
They'll pray for me, but also that it's not going to go any farther. Like, it's not going to end up on Facebook. It's not going to end up on, social media somewhere, like, such and such just happened. But for me, it's a good sounding board to be able to have those conversations and have somebody that I can call just to be able to talk about it. Because to me, it can't be anybody in your church. It can't be another employee. It probably can't be somebody that's even in your own town, because they know people who go to your church. And so to me, it's not in your church, it's not in your state, it's not in your denomination. So it needs to be somebody far enough away who knows you, understands you, is not impressed by you, and you've given freedom to say, like, if I'm way off base, tell me. And sometimes it happens. Like, I'll and then they'll say, hey, like, have you thought about it this way? Like, you might be a little off base on this one. Like, and again, I I allow them to do that into my life, and I do it into theirs. And so again, doing life together, we all get better, we all learn, and at the end of the day, life is better in community. But you've got to find the community, you've got to find a safe
Amen.
community to do it.
Absolutely. And I think this is where part of it, Glenn, you hit the nail on the head that I think it's important for church leaders to remember that they can't go do this alone. And this is where part of it is one of the things that you've really emphasized there is that accountability, that fellowship with other peer folks and having it where it allows you just to be able to open up, but then have that level of accountability with other folks that said, hey, I've been there, I understand it. And I totally, want to help encourage you. And also, during that times, if needed to help correct in a godly way of saying, look, this is how you can adjust and pivot as needed.
Yeah.
Because this is where I've seen it so much. And I think this is why we've seen so many of these other high profile situations of ultimately, I say pastors have sometimes felt very isolated because it's always on their shoulders. They don't have the ability to share with someone else around their congregation because the congregation is expecting they're
Right.
going to take all of that and just really handle it because he is the shepherd of the flock too. But they are also just as humans need that ability to have other folks that they can get encouragement from too. And that's why I think what you've been doing so well at TCN and some of these other groups with the roundtables has been so important because of what we're able to see people just being able to open up and encourage one another too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can testify to that. Like, this was my first TCN Metro meeting that I went to down in Louisville in March. Sorry, Glenn, I was live tweeting the entire time. I didn't know it was good to keep the circle and trust.
He had the AI note taker to the
Kidding.
bloodline. Just
That's correct. The AI note tech. Oh my gosh. Yeah, my goodness. But yeah, there was just such a spirit of camaraderie, of just candor, a
Yeah.
lot of candor, but also just a spirit of love and care for one another and wanting to see the church succeed, no matter where it was in the country. It was a wonderful thing to see.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, we started them just to say, what if we got together? We used to just meet at the national conference in July for about an hour. And then it was like, hey, what if we met outside of this for, maybe a day or so? And so we put out an email to a bunch of us and said, hey, if you're interested, we're going to be in, I think the first one was at Church of the Highlands in Birmingham back, I don't know, 2008 or something. And we had 35 people show up. Like, wow, that's really cool. So, okay, well, let's try it again. And we did another one. And there were 45, and then there were, so again, it's grown. And my whole focus on these roundtables is, yes, we're going to get together, and yes, we'll talk about, what we're doing, and we'll talk about policies, and we'll talk about, how, the software and challenges. But honestly, to me, being the conversations in between the discussions as a big group is where a lot of community happens. And I tell people during these meetings is I want you to be able to, when you leave here, when you have a question 2 months, 3 months, whatever down the road, be able to pick up and pick up a phone and call Ken and go, hey, Ken, you said something about this at the meeting. And Ken is no longer just a name. He's not just a name or a contact. Ken is a person that I spent time with. We had coffee, we talked about it, we laughed, we cried, we talked about all the challenges because, one of the things that I have said for years is ministry is, it doesn't matter what denomination you're in. Yes, there are some, there's some intrinsic things that happen, but how we care for people is the same, whether you're a Methodist, Episcopal, Baptist, non-denominational. Buildings have the same issues no matter what the denomination is. And so a lot of the things that we're dealing with sometimes may be new to me, but somebody else that's in the group has already experienced it and they've already dealt with, or they changed from software X to software Y and the pitfalls that went through all that. And so let's form these relationships. Let's talk about this and find ways that we can communicate, especially outside of when we're meeting. And so again, I can pick up the phone and, Chris or Ken, like y'all are live individuals that I met and spent time with. You're not just a contact on a list that somebody said, hey, if you have a question, call this guy. Like, I don't know who you are. And so to me, the roundtables are great to be able to form those relationships and have those times. We now do them twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. Next one will be in Phoenix, Arizona in early September. So you can find more information at thechurchnetwork.com on their event tab. But just love to try and get people together and share experiences and do life together, because that's honestly, that's where we all thrive. And I will say from my side is, especially early on, it's not where I lived in the early part of my career,
Mm.
because
Mm.
I was the only black and white guy in the whole building. And so, I had to figure it out, and I didn't have a group of friends that I could pick up the phone and call. And even within our town, I didn't have really the relationships among other people that did what we do. And so, it took me a while to find some of those people, meet some of those people. And again, that's why I've been advocating this for 25 years, is that we all need to have, a group of people that can help us do life and help us do ministry, because whatever I'm dealing with now, you at your church may have just gone through it, or you're just getting ready to go through it. So let's learn together, and let's find ways to do life better.
Oh yeah. So one of the things that you just brought up here as well is just even knowing that these types of conversations, it goes beyond even denominational lines. I still remember when I was serving as a controller of a large mission agency, and it was a big church planning network, and even visiting a church planner in that Pacific Northwest area, which is very far from the Bible Belt, right, Glenn?
Oh yeah.
It's very different in terms of what you see there. And the whole thing there is the church planner was saying, "Hey, I'm just going to admit to you all, on a weekly basis, I connect with the Presbyterian pastor down the street and the Methodist down the street, and also the non-denominational, because we need that support network." And
Mm.
that's one of the things that you guys get to do here within what TCN does with that roundtable, are people to help support each other, knowing that, look, at the end of the day, there may be some things that, whether it's the doctrinal side from the difference between a Presbyterian and Baptist and all, beyond that, the whole thing and the focus is changing lives through Jesus Christ, right? And that's where
Yeah.
part of it here is just remembering what our purpose is. And that's what I find so encouraging here are fellow leaders there that are able to do that. Even just the topic of leadership, Glenn, I know you mentioned that the start of your career was a little bit different too, but the Lord still called you to
Yeah.
Seacoast, right? And I'm curious though, because I know this is one of the things that I see and I look at you about this, is that a lot of people look at you as a leader or as a mentor because of some of the things you've been able to see with Seacoast. But for you in particular, who were some leaders or mentors that really changed or shaped the way you lead today as well?
Wow, that's a good question. Probably a couple of them. A couple of, I'll just say, pre being a believer. The first boss that I ever went to work for back in when I was in the retail world, kid was a great guy. He was a hard, very driven individual. He was actually a scientist by trade, and so he approached things very analytically, which was great for me because that's how I thought. But he really taught me and impressed upon me that hard work, you had to work hard, you had to apply yourself,
Yeah.
you had to be very good at what
Absolutely.
you did in order to succeed, or that you can say you are successful. And so that was a very early one. I am an Eagle Scout. I was actually the youngest Eagle Scout of the state of Oklahoma at the time, and my scoutmaster, and I love him. He is now a retired judge, and he impressed upon me just the drive to succeed, set a goal, work towards a goal, no matter what the obstacles are, find ways to overcome them and become better. Also, kind of got me involved in my love of the outdoors, which still, goes on today. And then on the business world, several business people, mainly in the church, especially some of our early business leaders in the church, helped me kind of understand and mentor me in terms of how do we need to tackle some of this? How do we take a really big project and break it down into kind of bite-sized pieces to make it work? So again, there's some business leaders. I'm not, I'm not a big podcast guy. I listen to some, but it's not like, honestly, I just don't have a ton of time to do that.
Yeah.
And so I have started listening to a few more over this last year or so. I've got two different construction projects for Seacoast. One is in Charleston, one is outside of Charleston. So the outside of Charleston is an hour and a half away. So most of my time driving back and forth, most people listen to the radio. I actually leave the radio off 99% of the time. It's actually for me a good time to pray. It's a good time for me to focus and kind of just make sure that I'm centered. And it's also a really good time for me to make a lot of phone calls, because I spend a lot
Yeah.
of time making phone calls while I'm on the road. So, again, it's just we find ways to make it work.
And I'm assuming, Glenn, that it was just an oversight that you didn't mention the Margin for Mission podcast as the only podcast that you listen to.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I should have put that in there first. Yeah.
Plenty of time on that 1.5 hour drive back and forth.
That's right. That's right.
There you go. There you go.
So, Glenn, as we're talking about your development as a leader and your ability to gather other leaders together and make them feel like they're in a really safe and cozy environment where they can share experiences and share best practices and, maybe get a little bit of admonition along the way, along with encouragement. I'm curious about your particular position at Seacoast as an administrative pastor. The question that I'm sure maybe you've had to respond to one time or another, is there a typical day in the life of Glenn Wood at Seacoast? And if so, what does that look like?
I would love to tell you that Monday I do this and Tuesday I do this and Wednesday, I don't have 2 days that are ever the same. We'll pick on today. Like today, I've been working on finishing up some punch list items and making sure the stuff gets done for these 2 projects. I'm working on reviewing a lease for a potential campus. I'm working on the design for that campus to try and figure out how to squeeze more ministry into more spaces, into smaller spaces to keep our costs down. Processing some invoices, working on trying to buy a new asset for the church. And that's just today. And that's even before we got onto this podcast. So, no 2 days for me are ever the same. You can look at my schedule and some days they're packed and some days they're hit or miss. And I'm filling in the pieces all in between. But I can honestly say, I don't think I've ever had really 2 weeks that are the same in the 30 plus years that I've been doing this.
And that's where part of it is, you've had to become agile, right? When it comes to even just navigating what's happening there too. And I'm curious, like, what are some of the biggest challenges you have when it comes to leading at this size and pace that Seacoast is going? Because I know we talked about it when we were together in Louisville, and that's where I was just curious. Even now, it continues to grow, and just love to hear that.
Yeah, for me, just trying to keep a list. Like I normally I am a big Excel guy. I spent a large part of my career living in spreadsheets, designing spreadsheets, pivot tables, data analysis. I love doing all that kind of stuff. But so I originally started working on my to-do list in Excel. I have since moved it out of there. And I have a weekly to-do list. So every Monday morning, I'll sit down and write through all the things that need to be done. It could be as simple as, returning a phone call. It could be as complex as, do a lease or do it like whatever. But I try and get it as specific as I can for a couple of reasons. Number one, it helps you make sure that I get things done that are prioritized and need to get done. And number two, I also like being able to check them off the list and say, yep, I accomplished that. So, sometimes there are times that I probably have put a few things on my list just to check them off to say that I did them. So, those kind of things happen. But to me, I'm a big work. I've got to have some kind of a to-do list so that I can try and keep them spinning, because at any given point, you've got 46 plates that you need to keep spinning. Going back to the days in the circus of the guy that's going around spinning all the plates and trying to make sure that they all stay up. And, most of the time you can keep them spinning. Occasionally you'll have one that falls off and breaks and you got to put it all back together. But, for me, I've got to stay organized because there are so many different projects that are working on, and every project has, sub projects and tasks that have to get done underneath it. So some of them are pretty easy. Like, I need to make sure I order this, or like, hey, I need to develop the list for my what do I need to buy in terms of equipment for this next campus that we're going to plan, and what size of the ice maker need to be, and how many gallons of coffee are we going to have to process? That means how many coffee pots am I going to have to need, which means I've got to make sure that I provide enough electrical circuits and counter space for all the coffee machines. So, sometimes it's taking this really big task and breaking it down into a whole lot of small ones, and then trying to work on each one of them at a time to try and make sure that hopefully at the end of the project, they all are done and it all comes together.
There's a lot of wisdom there. Like I remember when I was first starting out as a leader, I did not really understand that me putting one thing on my to-do list, that it might have 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 different decisions that had to be made in order to make that thing happen. So for instance, we had a process where we took clients I worked for a faith-based legal aid organization. We had thousands of clients a year, and our intake process was super Byzantine. It just was not flowing very well. And so on my to-do list one week, I put down revolutionize our intake process. Well, you can't check that off the list, right? So I had to break it down.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. The first step was understand our intake process, map out intake process, talk with other constituents who were involved in the intake process, maybe look at client survey data, because we did survey clients to see what they thought about our intake process. Spoiler alert, they didn't like it very much. So there were all kinds of constituent things that you had to kind of walk through in order to get to the real nub of the thing that was check offable. So that's really wise words, Glenn, and I really appreciate that. I hope our listeners do too. I was curious, as you're kind of walking through the various things that you're doing over the course of, I'll call it an average week. It sounds like that doesn't really exist, but we'll just say it for the sake of ease. As you're walking through, what is Glenn's to do when you're looking at your to-do list, and then what's for someone else to do, and then what's for no one to do? How do you kind of walk through that analysis of what is yours, what's someone else's, and what's in the hands of the Lord and the Lord only?
Yeah, so that's great. So kind of, I'll go back to the early days. When I first started it, it was me. Like I was the only one. When I came on board, I hired an accountant, and then she and I sat down and figured out how do we need to set up the chart of accounts? We need to change the chart of accounts, and so it was her and I trying to think through it, and then because back then there wasn't anybody else to support me. Like if it had to get done, I had to find a way to do it, and so initially for me early on, it was I just have to find ways to make it work. I have to find and make that work. And then as we started to grow, then we were able to help bring on some other people. And then for me, I think one of the things that I have to realize, and there are times I have to stop and think about this, is that, I think I can do a lot of things. I can do a number of things especially well. I could do a lot of things well. And then there are some things that I just struggle at just getting done. And so I've got to sometimes look at that list and say, okay, what on this list is something that I'm going to struggle with doing, and then who can I find to help me do that? It's, to me, that's an easier said than done sometimes. But again, I think that because I think some of the things that we do, I figured out how to do a lot of things, and some of them really well, and then some of them I can just kind of make sure that we get by, and we're not going to jail, and we're keeping everything's legal. And so we'll do those. But really, for me, making sure that I can pass off something to someone else. Good example. One of the projects for our Manning campus, that's the one that's an hour and a half away. We got, the majority of all the construction done. We never really designed all the closets for the children's rooms. Designed them as to, are these going to be shelves? Are these rods? Like, what are we going in here? What are we putting in here? Do they need lights? And so I started working on that myself. And then I was up there, and one of the volunteers came up to me and said, "Hey, can I help you with those closets? Number one, because I'm here, and but let me kind of, you kind of turn me loose on it." So I gave him, my notes that I had, which were not incredibly detailed, but detailed enough to kind of give an idea. And then he ran with it and has done a great job of getting it done and getting them installed. And so for two things: number one, I didn't have to go up there and go back and do it, because it's 3 hours for me up and back. He's there, loves doing it. As a volunteer, it's something that he can pour into his own campus, and so they take ownership in that. So it's good. So again, I've got to stop sometimes and say, what do I need to delegate to somebody? And this is one of those things that there are times that I struggle with this, because I just think I'm the only one that can get it done. Yeah. And what do I need to delegate to somebody, and who can I delegate it to? Realizing that sometimes it's going to come off perfectly and it's going to be great, and other times that ball's going to get dropped. And I've had that where I've said, "Hey, I need you to handle ordering this equipment," and they said sure. They ran with it, and then 3 weeks later, like, "Why isn't the equipment here?" "Oh, well, I haven't ordered it." Like, but 3 weeks ago you said you were going to order the equipment. And so I've got to be, I've got to make sure that I'm not fussing at them because I delegated to him. Maybe I should have followed up more often earlier to make sure he got it done. But again, it's finding people that you can partner with, pass some of this stuff on, and then let them run with it. And so again, that's one of those things that over the years, I kind of, that ebbs and flows. Sometimes I do really well with it, and there are other times I struggle with making sure that I delegate enough, and I'm not trying to just do more of it myself.
And that's so interesting just to even mention here, Glenn, that especially because for us, Chris and I had the honor of being able to interview a pastor of a small to medium sized church and everything they're trying to navigate and handle and all, essentially a multitask. Then we met and interviewed a pastor of a medium large church that had a new campus that they were also expanding into, and everything that they're trying to juggle to as well. And now we're talking to you, Glenn, a church that is continuing to rapidly grow, and some of the things that you're navigating. It almost seems like just in general, the type of juggling, it's not that it's going to be completely different. It just changes in terms of
That's
what
right.
all you get to do for that day, because there are certain nuances, right? For you, Glenn, you may not be interacting with one campus down the street. You may be interacting with a campus an hour and a half away, making sure you're able to get some oversight while still entrusting people that you are delegating to handle it, while you can help focus on other figurative fires as well. And that seems to be just kind of the thing that you seem to be thriving in that, Glenn. That's why, I've had my question of just even seeing, like, you've navigated just how Seacoast even started to now
Yeah.
it's, expanding rapidly. There's multi-campus as well. And some of the complexities of that is, for you, this may be it could either be a toss-up question or be the biggest curveball, right? What has been for you, especially a type of growth? And you just mentioned everything you're navigating, and even in terms of just balancing, what has been the hardest part of a church that has rapid growth and campus expansion? Because you've shared a little bit about some of the expansions that you've had to do and manage as
Yeah.
well at Seacoast.
I think one of them would be our transition from our founding pastor to our lead pastor. So
Mm.
that happened now probably 8 years ago. Looking probably 7, 8 years ago. But we went from Greg Surratt as our founding pastor to Josh Surratt as our lead pastor. Just understanding and having to understand your leader and understand the style that they're going to lead with and how they're going to lead and how they process information. And I'll compare and contrast Greg and Josh. Both great leaders. Greg was a very much a hands-off. Like, I'm going to cast the vision. My first building project for the church was in 1989. Or no, 1999. He cast the vision on October 1st to expand the worship center. I spent Thanksgiving reviewing plans for the new design with my new in-laws. I got to tell you, that was a really great opportunity for bonding there.
Wonderful bonding moment.
Oh, it really, very much was. December 1st, we broke ground and we held our first services on Easter Sunday in the new space. Greg was a very much 30,000 foot level. Bring to me only the big stuff that has to get dealt with. We'll figure it out and go from there. And so that's how he managed. And, from the first half or so, more than half of my years at Seacoast, that's how I interacted with Greg, and we got along really well. Transition, then we were early on in the construction of our 2,500 seat worship center that we opened in 1999 or 2019. We were early in construction, and we transitioned from Greg being the leader to Josh being the leader. So I went from somebody that wanted a 30,000 foot view. Josh wanted to be involved. I'm not going to say in every level, but he wanted to be a lot more involved in the discussion on a more minute level. So this train is moving down the tracks at 80 miles an hour. We're trying to change conductors, and I'm trying to manage both of the old and the new. And for me, just learning how Josh as a leader was going to manage and what he wanted to see and what he wanted to be involved in was challenging, because not only was I managing the building of the construction, but also the change in leadership. And so for me, that was the challenge, is understanding your leaders. And I think one of the things that it taught me is that not all leaders are the same. Obviously, that's an easy thing to say, but when you're dealing with it, it can be a little bit challenging. And again, I thought, well, Greg Surratt to Josh Surratt, leadership styles are going to be similar. No, they weren't. They were totally different. And so for me, I had to learn and I had to adjust how I communicated with Josh versus Greg. I had to learn what I needed to bring him into the conversations of what needed to happen and what at what level, and what involvement did he want to have in all of these decisions. And so I think that is always a challenge when you have some kind of a change in leadership, just understanding who the new leaders are. And even leaders that have been there but are changing in roles. They're going from position A to position B. Their style might change in some areas. So again, just trying to understand leaders and how they interact and what do they want to see. And, again, just trying to understand what do I need to bring to them as something that I need their input on, or I'm just going to make a decision and we'll adjust it down the road. So I think leadership is a really big one for me, was just trying to understand the transition and how we were doing it, but we were transitioning while that train was running down the track at 80 miles an hour.
Wow. Wow. It's like you're building a plane while you're flying it, and the pilot is shifting around. You got a new captain that's coming in. Those are significant leadership transitions, leadership moments.
Yeah.
And to be able to navigate that in a way that is full of care and concern for other people and compassion, and at the same time getting things done is a real challenge. So that's definitely commendable. As you were talking, Glenn, I think about moments of succession and moments of transition as being moments where it's rife with potential for division and strife and all those words that pop up in the Pauline sin list: rivalries, bitterness, anger, frustration, etc. And I'm curious for you, as you guys have navigated that succession and it's in the rearview mirror, plus navigating the seasons of growth that you've had and the multiple campuses and that sort of thing. How do you maintain some sense of unity, a unified culture in the midst of all that? Because that is one of the things that is always in the crosshairs, both on a spiritual level of the enemy, but also just kind of on a human level, where we're trying to move this ship together. But there's all kinds of competing factors that want to pull against that. So love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think early on at Seacoast, we were all in the same mindset because staff wise we were small. I mean, there were 10, 12 staff members, and so we had lunch together, we had dinner together, we had meetings together, we did life together, because there were just a small number of us trying to, especially the early days as Seacoast was starting to grow and trying to navigate that. As we tended to get larger, you have more layers of leadership, you have more campuses, you have more leaders, different backgrounds. I think communication is the big key. And I think sometimes we've done this really well. I think other times, like any other business, we've also had our challenges with communication. But making sure and talking a lot about who we are, why we exist, is something that Seacoast does a monthly all staff meeting, which is one day a month. We all come together, one location, one campus, have a time to hear from Josh as our leader as to, the vision of where we're going. We have meetings within departments, but throughout a lot of that is, here's who we are as a church, and, I can say this as being a member of Seacoast for 35 years, is that the mission of the church hasn't changed. How we go about it has changed, in the sense that back then we were a single location. The whole concept of a multi-site was nowhere in anybody's vernacular back then. And so now, we're, going on 16 campuses. And so now you've got 16 campus pastors, and then you have ministry leaders underneath that. I think making sure that you communicate well and communicate often and communicate the same thing, I think is a big thing, is a big task for churches to undertake. Because a lot of times leaders can be like, they're going to pursue this thing, and then they're going to pursue this, and now they're going to pursue this, and so sometimes the mission and the vision can get lost in that. So I think for us, making sure that we talk about our core values, why we exist, how we exist, the things that we, even to the level on the campuses of what is negotiable and what is non-negotiable on a campus level. Like for Seacoast, non-negotiable, obviously the Bible is the infallible word of God. That's a non-negotiable. Now, but at the same time, what version of the Bible you're going to preach out of, or you're pulling your notes from, early on it was like, well, we're going to speak out of the NIV. Now it's, it's like what makes the most sense. It could be any of NIV. It could be New Living Translation. It could be the Message. It could, and so again, that's negotiable. We can talk about that. But even things like classroom names for Seacoast, those are non-negotiable. We're going to call our student ministry custom and at every campus. And so as you have people that are transitioning from one campus to the other, they move, whatever, their kids go to custom. Custom is custom, no matter what site you're on, no matter what location. And so I think from the staff side, making sure that we communicate well and we communicate often is something that Seacoast, especially now, is doing a very good job of talking about mission and values of where we're going and how we're getting there. And then also, again, giving some leeway because how ministry gets carried out in the campus that my wife and I attend, which is our smallest campus at 100 people, is substantially different than Mount Pleasant, which was the original campus that is now 8 or 10,000 people. How you do ministry is totally different on those two, and so you've got to give some flexibility on some of that. And again, I think we've done a really good job of trying to define some of that as to what is non-negotiable and what things can campuses flex and make work. Because again, at my campus, our staff is 2 full-time and 1 part-time. You go to Mount Pleasant, they're a campus of 8,000 people. They're probably 150 people full-time. So again,
Wow.
staff structures are totally different.
Yeah, and you even just mentioned in that case here, you almost have to approach it on each campus as if almost it's like its own standalone and having to navigate and be agile in that situation too. And so Glenn, like you said, it's pretty much every day is probably a very unique day that you get to interact with one of the many campuses. And this is where even part of this, for my own curiosity, Glenn, just on a personal side, what are the things you're doing just to maintain even margin in your own spiritual and leadership life? Because, burnout is a real thing. It's a concept that could easily happen. And I'm just curious how you're able to prevent that too, as well, with all the things that you may be handling and navigating on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's a great question. A couple of things. Number one, for me, boundaries. Trying to set some boundaries has been, especially these last, I'll say, 12 years, have been a very large part of it. It used to be when I would go to church on Sunday, people would come up and go, "Hey, I need to ask you about this, or let's talk about this." And I got to the point where I said, "Great, I am here worshiping just like you are. Send me an email, and on Monday we'll talk about it." And so because very seldom will do something that they're bringing up that had to be dealt with right then. So setting some
Yeah.
boundaries on especially my time when I'm coming to church with my wife and my kids, just to go to church. Like I'm there to just attend. And so sure, if the building burns down, that's a whole other deal. But if you just have a question about something, we can deal with that on Monday. So setting boundaries was one, and having a sabbatical, or not, excuse me, having a day off every week. We talk a lot about it at Seacoast, and there are times that I have done that. But then there are also times when I'm in the middle of a construction project, especially, I don't get a day off during the week just because construction happens, and the GC has questions, and something's got to get dealt with, or a decision has to be made. And so I have Seacoast has allowed me to adjust my time and my schedule. Like right now, I have really very few commitments to do on the weekend. So I'm more working Monday to Friday than I am working also the weekend. Again, part of it is the season of where I'm at, but part of it is the area that I'm functioning in. So again, trying to manage that and make it work. And honestly, on a personal level, back in 2004, we were in the middle of a construction project, and I really felt like I needed something to focus on that was not church related. So I started making Christmas ornaments on a scroll saw. And a scroll saw is a saw that has a very, very sharp, very thin blade, and your hands, my fingers have to be about I don't know, eighth of an inch away from the blade when I'm doing this. Otherwise, because if you're not careful, you'll cut your finger off. And so
Right.
luckily I still have all 10 of them, so we're all good. But one of the things it did is that it made me focus on something other than ministry, which was
Mm.
good because it gave me something outside of that. And so again, it was a time in my life where I really felt like I needed not a distraction, but something else to focus on. And so it was great. That's one of the things that I did. I did it for a number of years. And then for me, making sure that I'm taking time off and taking vacations. Early on, was when we first got into cruising because so our first cruise was in 2001, and I took it. And especially back then, cell phones were expensive, and especially roaming plans. And so you got on a cruise ship, you turned the phone off and you put it away and you didn't touch it
Oh,
for a
yeah.
week. And
That's
so
right.
for me, it was a great way for me to totally disconnect from the world. And so honestly, it's one of the reasons that my wife and I still like to go on cruises, because I could put the phone away, I could put the computer away, I could totally disconnect for a week or so. And again, that's something that for me is a really big deal. Making
Yeah.
sure that I have time. And I'll even say during the week, or during times of special, a lot of things going on, I'll come home at the end of the day and I'll, look at my wife and say, honey, I just need some time alone. And I'll go in the bedroom, close the door. And she knows that I just need to be left alone for a while. I just need to decompress. And she honors that and is really good about it. But there are just times that I just don't want to talk to anybody else. I spend way too much time on the phone in meetings dealing with stuff. I just need 30 or 45 minutes just to decompress for myself.
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
And I'd say even for that, Glenn, cruising is a favorite of our families. We haven't been able to do it lately, but it has been such a wonderful time just to even disconnect, right? And you had so many things that you could do at a cruise ship. I still remember when we were younger, our first kind of like figurative kind of disagreement and what we were going to do was she wanted to watch a theater thing. I wanted to go to the midnight Mexican buffet that the cruise ship had. And it was one of those things that one was going to have to decide over the other. And ultimately, I still went to the buffet and then I met up with him later. But it's just like the whole thing, like, we all have our priorities, but we're able to enjoy that time too, right? And I think that's important is that we work hard. All of us work hard here, Glenn, but it's important to also find time to rest, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things that you've been really highlighting is you've set the proper boundaries or hedges of protection around those particular areas that are non-negotiables, which is that rest. Because if not, you wouldn't be able to keep going like you're doing right now.
Absolutely. And so sabbaticals are something that, back 30 years ago, nobody did a sabbatical. Nobody really understood what they were. Seacoast has had them for a number of years. I have not been as diligent over the years of taking mine as I should have, because I've gone from one project to another project to another project. And so that's one of the things that I took one a number of years ago. And I tell people it was the greatest 1 week vacation that I've ever had, even though I was gone for 4.5 weeks.
Yes.
But it's really encouraging churches to allow their staff to do this. And again, I'll have another one coming up, and I will definitely take that.
Good.
Yeah, Glenn, the older I get, the more I'm impressed and just incredibly grateful for people who can measure their time in ministry and full-time vocational ministry in decades, and can say, yes, I've been serving faithfully by the Lord's help, continuing on the path as well rest as I can. I mean, the idea of Sabbath, it's literally baked into the fabric of reality since Genesis 1 and 2, right? And so it's we should take heed of that. That's an important thing. And as we kind of think through some quick hit advice from Glenn, Glenn is he's going to give some just gold leadership gold to executive pastors, administrative pastors, leaders of all stripes. What kind of advice for executive pastors? What kind of advice would you say that's on the top of your mind that looking back on 4-ish decades of ministry
Mhm.
at Seacoast? What would you say to people that are considering either A, jumping into an executive pastor role, or B, are in one and maybe they're they've been in the oven for a little bit, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
they can feel like that they're getting a little crispy around the edges. But what would you tell those folks?
Uh, Probably tell them a couple things. Number one, you need to find somebody that you can do life together. This is outside of your spouse. You need to find somebody that is a little bit farther ahead of wherever you are in whatever role you're doing, that has probably another couple of years more so than you do, to become really good friends with and learn from. Because again, I don't know it all. Even after doing this for 30 years, people say, oh, you know everything. Like, no, I don't. There's a lot of things I don't have a clue about. But I mean, as a new leader, you need to find somebody that is a little bit farther down the road than you are, that you can do life together and call and, talk to. Maybe it's, this is not a daily thing, but maybe once every couple of weeks, just check in with them. And just to try and, number one, let them help speak into your life. So that's number one. Number two, I would also say, make some of those phone calls to people that you just met along the way. Just to pick up a call, call somebody and go, hey, we haven't talked in a year. Last time I saw you was at X. How are you doing? Like there's no agenda. I'm not trying to do anything for them. I'm not trying to, but just to try and encourage them and help them to realize that they're not in this alone. I wish I had had somebody like that 30 years ago to do that. But I think, part of our jobs as church leaders is we need to do this to the next generation, the generation that's coming up. And again, it doesn't have to be a 3-hour phone call. It can be a 30-second phone call. How are you doing? Anything I can pray for you about? How's it going? That may be all the conversation. Because I think that's something that we need to do to help encourage the next, round of leaders. Again, I can say this because I've got a lot. I don't have any hair on the top of my head. What little bit of hair I have on my face is gray. Is that like I'm not going to do this forever, and so there are going to be people that are going to have to take the mantle and run with it, and so we need to encourage them. Probably number 3 would be find ways to learn something. Just learn a new skill. And it could be, again, I'm a spreadsheet guy. So sometimes for me, it's learning how to do something in the spreadsheet, quicker way to do it, whatever it is, reading about leadership, reading, whatever books you want to read, but just be a constant learner, being able to do that. Now, my wife is going to listen to this and go, well, you don't read a lot. I said, well, she and I read 2 different things. She reads for fun. I get to read contracts and leases. So after I've done that for several hours during the day, I don't really want to sit home and spend 3 hours reading a book. But, that's between her and I.
Let me just tell you, Glenn, I get flack from Chris and his friend because I use audiobooks. I can't really sit down and read a book right now, but I still think I'm getting some good concepts out of it too. And I think that's the whole thing about always trying to find ways just to learn, right? Debate. So Chris, that's again, okay, agree to disagree then, my friend. Well, awesome, Glenn. Definitely, I've appreciated this wonderful insights that you provide us this episode. And my hope is actually, there's actually a lot of other topics that I know you and I have talked about as well with Chris about some things we could delve into, especially like managing multiple construction projects at the same time and what to do, what not to do, maybe, and some of those things. But this is where part of it is just some of the encouragement you've been able to give the leaders that are listening on this podcast. I think has been completely invaluable in terms of what everyone is going to be able to listen to. So I can't wait again until we get to hang out again at the Church Network annual meeting and some of these other events. Yeah. So definitely appreciate you being on this episode with us too.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate our time together. I appreciate the years that we've known each other and the friendship that we have. Glad to help you guys. I think one of the things that that our founding pastor Greg Terad has always said was we always need to make sure that we're encouraging, and we'll talk about what we do, especially at Seacoast. So a lot of times churches will call and go, well, tell us the good things. Like, what? I'd rather tell you the things that we tried that didn't work, so that you hopefully don't try those as well. So again, we'll talk about what I say is the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because there are challenges on any level, on pretty much any topic you want to delve into. So we certainly glad to do that.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Well, definitely appreciate your time, Glenn. Chris, always a pleasure. Always hang out on this podcast. And again, can't wait till our next episode together with you, Glenn.
Sounds good. Have a great day.
This is not a CPA firm. Assurance, attest, and audit services provided by Cape & Krause, LLC. Carr, Riggs & Ingram, and CRI are the brand names under which Carr, Riggs & Ingram, LLC, CRI Advisors, LLC, and Cape & Krause, LLC, and CRI Cape & Krause Advisors, LLC, provide professional services. CRI CPA, Cape & Krause CPA, CRI Advisors, Cape & Krause Advisors, Carr, Riggs & Ingram Capital, LLC, and their respective subsidiaries operate as an alternative practice structure in accordance with the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct and applicable law, regulations, and professional standards. CRI CPA and Cape and Krause CPA are licensed independent certified public accounting firms that separately provide attest services as well as additional ancillary services to their clients. CRI CPA and Cape and Krause CPA are independently owned CPA firms that provide attestation services separate from one another. CRI Advisors and Cape and Krause Advisors provide tax and business consulting services to its clients. CRI Advisors and its subsidiaries, including Cape and Krause Advisors, are not licensed CPA firms and will not provide any attest services. The entities falling under the Carr, Riggs, and Ingram, or CRI brand, are independently owned and are not responsible or liable for the services and or products provided, or engaged to be provided by any other entity under the Carr, Riggs, and Ingram, or CRI brand. Our use of the term CRI, we, our, us, and terms of similar import denote the alternative practice structure conducted by CRI CPA, Cape and Krause CPA, Cape and Krause Advisors, and CRI Advisors as appropriate.